Good morning, boys and girls. I'm Eleanor Hawkins, and welcome to Telestory Time. You know, I bring along this green book quite often with me because the title is something I want you to really know. Yes, it is Reading Can Be Fun. And you know, boys and girls, inside it tells us if you can read, you have the key that opens the door to the world of books. Do come in. And then when we turn the page, we see sketches of all of our favorite book characters. Yes, there's Mary Poppins over here, and here's Pinocchio. And right here is Goldilocks and the one bear there. And here is Peter Pan. Yes, boys and girls, we want each of you to know that reading can be fun. And now I'm going to have a good time this morning reading to you. And our very first story that I've chosen is entitled The Little Car That Wanted a Garage. There was once a little car whose name was Gabriel. Now, poor Gabriel had no garage. He lived out of doors in a lot where they sold used cars. He wore signs that said, "For sale, cheap." There were dents in his fenders, his paint was rusty, and his doors sagged. Every day, Gabriel watched the shiny new cars roll by, but they never even saw Gabriel. "Oh," thought Gabriel, "how I should like to go whizzing right along. Oh, how I wish I were new and shiny." But especially, he thought sadly, how I wish I could have a garage. Well, one day, two ladies came along. They said to the man who sold cars, "Have you a small car?" "Oh, yes," said the man. "Here's a small car," and he pointed to Gabriel. "Well, we'll try it," they said, and in they climbed. "Now," whispered Gabriel in great excitement, "I'll show them I can whiz right along, and then the ladies will buy me, and then they'll give me a garage." Whiz, whiz, whiz went Gabriel around and around the block. He was feeling mighty happy. Round and round and round the block, whiz, whiz, whiz. That will show them, he thought. But the ladies cried out, "Mercy, we don't want this car. It won't slow down at all." And then they went away. Gabriel felt pretty sad. Now the next day a college boy came. "Oh, here's a fine car," said the man. "Well, I'll try it," said the college boy. "Oh ho," thought Gabriel, "this time I'll go very slow, if that's what they want, and then the college boy will buy me, and he'll give me a garage." So Gabriel went very, very, very slow. But the college boy said, "This car's too slow," and off he marched. Gabriel felt terribly sad. But the next day a young lady came, and this time Gabriel was determined to do the right thing. "I won't go too fast, and I won't go too slow, but I'll show her I've got pep in my engine, and then she'll buy me, and she'll give me a garage." Now the young lady started the engine. "Bang!" shouted Gabriel. "Bang, bing, bang, pop, pop." "My goodness," cried the young lady, "this car's much too noisy." And off she hurried. "Oh dear," cried poor Gabriel, "won't anyone ever buy me and give me a garage? I'll never be so noisy again." So the next day when a man came and pressed the starter, Gabriel didn't make any noise, not any noise at all. "This car won't even start," said the man, and he turned on his heel and left. Well, Gabriel just felt awful. Now he was sure that he would never, never have a garage. And then Jimmy and Jimmy's daddy came along. "Have you a car for $50?" asked Jimmy's daddy. The man who sold cars was so mad at Gabriel, he said, "Yes, yes, there's a car for $50. Now they climbed right in and drove around the block. Gabriel was so surprised that he didn't have time to show off. He just acted natural. "Sold," cried Jimmy's daddy, very pleased. They drove up the street and stopped in front of a little yellow house. Then Jimmy and his daddy greased Gabriel's engine till it purred like a kitten. "Oh, I sound real quiet," thought Gabriel. Then Jimmy's daddy hammered out the dents in the fenders and oiled the hinges and fixed the sagging doors. "I'm beginning to feel real good," whispered Gabriel. And last of all, Jimmy and his daddy gave Gabriel a new coat of shiny red paint. "Ooh, I look fine," shouted Gabriel. Then Jimmy and his daddy and Mommy and Pooch, their dog, all went for a ride. Every time they whizzed by another car, Gabriel bowed and smiled, and the other cars bowed and smiled too. And when they came home, they whizzed right up the driveway into a little yellow garage. And that, boys and girls, is the story of the little car that wanted a garage. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back in just a moment to show you books from the shelves of your public library. Boys and girls, our bookshelf this morning is made up of books that are wonderful stories to be read at bedtime. And the very first one I want to show you is entitled Once Upon a Story Time. And inside we have some wonderful stories and some very good illustrations. Yes, this has some very, very good stories to be read at bedtime. Once Upon a Story Time. Our next book is entitled Tell Me Some More. And this is a delightful picture story. And you can see that this little boy has lots and lots of adventures, as you can see all the way through. He goes to a very large public library. Yes, this is the story entitled Tell Me Some More. Our next book is a rather large one, and it has lots and lots of poems. Poems to be read to the very young. And here we have a darling little girl sitting on the front, and inside, beautiful illustrations and many, many poems. All the way through, you can see wonderful, wonderful illustrations. Yes, this is the book, Poems to be Read to the Very Young. Our next book has a beautiful rainbow on it. The classic treasury of children's poetry. And as you look very carefully, you can see the rainbow right up here. And inside, oh, look, another rainbow. And this poem is entitled The Rainbow Fairies. All the way through, we have beautiful illustrations and wonderful poems. Excellent poems to be read at bedtime. Yes, this is the book, The Classic Treasury of Children's Poetry. And then when I talk about poetry, I always have to include A Child's Garden of Verses by Robert Louis Stevenson. Some of the very best poetry that we can enjoy as children and as adults. And here you can see this title of this poem is Bed in Summer. All the way through, we have poem after poem and beautiful illustrations. As you can see, this is the land of counterpane, and most of us know that poem. Yes, this is A Child's Garden of Verses. And last of all, I'd like to show you this book, Tell Me a Story. And these are stories for your grandchildren and the art of telling them, especially written for grandparents. And inside, here is the first story. It's entitled Once Upon a Time. Yes, this is the book, Tell Me a Story. Boys and girls, any of these books can be checked out from any of the libraries in the Craven-Pamlico Carteret Regional Library System. Be sure and go to your library this week and use your library card to check out some very good books. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with another story in just a moment. Now, boys and girls, to celebrate May Day, I'm going to read you the story of the giraffe who went to school. In a big old-fashioned house, two ladies had a school where they taught 4 little girls. The ladies' names were Miss B and Miss D. The 4 little girls were Mary, Ann, Nancy, and Pam. They learned how to read and to write and to sew. They learned to sing and to dance. They had French lessons and learned to speak French. Everyone thought the children had lovely manners. Now, down the road from Miss B and Miss D's school was a small zoo where Alice the tame giraffe lived. Every day she would stretch her long neck out as far as it would go, which was pretty far, and look over to where Mary, Ann, Nancy, and Pam were playing games and reading books under the big trees in the yard. "Oh, if I could only go to school too," sighed Alice. "I would be so good and study so hard. Oh, I do wish I could go to school." So one day she got up very early, walked out the front of the gate, and down the road, and followed Mary, Ann, Nancy, and Pam right up to the schoolhouse. Now Miss B and Miss D were rather surprised, for they had never had a giraffe to teach before. "Please, please, Miss B," said Mary and Ann, "please let Alice stay." "Please, please, Miss D," said Nancy and Pam, "please, please let Alice stay." So Miss B and Miss D said they would be delighted to have Alice in their school. "Now we will all stand up straight and tall and sing 'America,'" said Miss B. Alice held her head up high like the children, but ouch! Oh, it bumped the ceiling. "Now we will all sit in a circle and read," said Miss D. Alice tried and tried, but she simply couldn't get comfortable in her little chair. And as for reading, well, big as she was, Alice just couldn't learn her ABCs. "Oh, we are so sorry," said Miss B and Miss D, "but Alice will have to go back to her own home at the zoo." "Then she won't be here tomorrow for May Day and dance around the maypole with us," cried Mary, Ann, Nancy, and Pam. Oh dear, everyone was sad. Alice was the saddest of all as she went home to the zoo. Big tears fell down her cheeks the next day when she stretched her neck out and saw the children gathered around the maypole. Oh, they looked lovely, and she wanted so much to be with them instead of just looking on. Suddenly, there was a little breeze. It started to blow, and it blew, and it blew, and it blew itself into a great big wind. It blew the 4 little girls' hair ribbons and sashes, and it blew Miss B's frilly blouse, and it blew Miss D's ruffles on her skirt. Worst of all, it blew the maypole right out of the ground, up into the air, and out of sight over the treetops. So the wind went away with the maypole. What a dreadful thing to happen! Who ever heard of a May Day without a maypole? And what in the world were they to do? Oh, Miss B was distressed. Miss D was distracted. And Mary, Ann, Nancy, and Pam were so disappointed that they cried. But Alice had been watching everything right from the zoo. I wonder, thought Alice, could I help? I wonder, maybe I could. I wonder, yes, I'll do it. She raced down the road. She ran into the garden. Quick, said Alice to Miss D, get more flowers. Quick, quick, said Alice to Miss B, get more ribbons. Quick, 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 said Alice to the children, fasten them on my head. I will be your maypole. So Mary, Ann, Nancy, and Pam danced around Alice and sang their May Day songs. They sang and danced and danced. Well, it was the best May Day Mary, Ann, Nancy, and Pam ever had. And Alice is the best maypole we have ever had. And do you know, Miss B and Miss D agreed. Even if Alice can't read and can't count and play games, she can be the most beautiful maypole in the whole world, said Mary, Ann, Nancy, and Pam. This made Alice very, very happy. She thought it was the very best thing anyone had ever said about her. And after this wonderful day, she knew that she would always be happy in her home at the zoo. And that, boys and girls, is the story of the giraffe who went to school. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with another story in just a moment. Boys and girls, our next story is The Surprise Party. Mama Moppet was baking. Oh, she baked cookies and tarts and cakes and biscuits every week for her very large family. And every baking day, she told the 7 little ragdoll Moppets to run outside and play. And that's just what she did on this baking day. Shh, she said to her children, shoo, shoo outside until I finish baking. Cozy and Sassy visited Mrs. Robin for a while. Mama is baking, they told Mrs. Robin, and we're not to bother her. They stayed a few minutes longer and then they skipped away through the trees. Now the Moppets are having a party, Mrs. Robin told Mr. Robin. Mrs. Moppet is baking, and you know what that means. We've never thanked Mrs. Moppet for the tidbits she leaves on the windowsill for us, Mr. Robin said. Now, this is a splendid time to do so. Mrs. Robin agreed, and they dressed in their best clothes and started out for the Moppet house. Now, Butch and Snub wandered down to the pond to sail their boat and got into a conversation with Mrs. Duck and her ducklings. Well, Mama's baking today, said Butch, and we're not allowed to pester, said Snub. Well, how nice, said Mrs. Duck. The baking, I mean. And she paddled off across the pond. My, she thought to herself, Mrs. Moppet is baking. That must mean a party. I wonder if this isn't a good time to take the children to call." So she dressed them all carefully, and off they started for the Moppet's house. Now Pumpkin and Tildy went over to play leapfrog with the rabbit children. "Mama is baking today," Pumpkin announced, "and we're not to get in her way," said Tildy, landing with a thump on the grass. Mr. and Mrs. Rabbit looked up. It sounded like the Moppets were having a party. "Of course we wouldn't dream," began Mrs. Rabbit. "Of going without an invitation," said Mr. Rabbit. "Still, it's months since we have visited the Moppets. I wonder if we couldn't just drop in this afternoon." And with that, Mr. Rabbit leaped to his feet. "Come, children," called Mrs. Rabbit. "Time to clean up." Muffin and Bear were sharing a small pot of honey. "Mama's baking today," Muffin explained, "so I came over to visit." Bear dipped a paw in the honey pot and wiggled his nose at the thought of baking. It could only mean one thing, a party, and a party meant all sorts of lovely things to eat. Still, it wasn't polite to go to a party without an invitation. Suddenly, Bear brightened. He had an idea. "Allow me to see you home, my dear," he said to Muffin, "and just give me a moment." And he disappeared and to his house, and soon he came out wearing a handsome new tie and a top hat. Muffin was very much impressed. They strolled through the woods toward the Moppet house. Down by the pond they met Mrs. Duck and the 6 little ducks walking in the same direction. They were all wearing their best hats. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Duck," sang out Bear, tipping his hat. And he thought to himself, "Now where are they going all dressed up? I wonder if they received an invitation to the party and I didn't." "Good afternoon," quacked Mrs. Duck, noticing Bear's top hat. "Now I wonder where he's going in his Sunday's best." She thought to herself, could he have received an invitation to the party and we didn't get one? Muffin and Bear strolled on, and Mrs. Duck and the 6 little ducks waddled along behind them. Not far behind the rabbit's house they met Mr. and Mrs. Rabbit and the 3 little rabbits, all looking very partyish indeed. "I do declare," thought Mrs. Rabbit, "Mrs. Moppet seems to have invited everyone to the party except us." Bear walked on holding Muffin's hand. Mrs. Duck and the 6 little ducks waddled along behind them, and Mr. and Mrs. Rabbit and the 3 little rabbits scampered along behind the ducks. Up a hill, down a hill, they all went, and just beyond the big oak tree they saw Mr. and Mrs. Robin ahead. "Well," said Mrs. Robin to her husband as she turned and saw the group, "everyone is certainly dressed up for the party. Do you think we're the only ones who didn't get an invitation?" Now it was quite a parade. When Butch and Snub and Cozy and Tildy joined the line, it made the parade even bigger. And when Mrs. Moppet looked out, she was sure it was the longest and biggest parade in the world. "Goodness," she whispered, "did any of you children invite all these for the visit?" "Oh, no, Mama," they all said. Indeed, they told the truth. "Well," said Mrs. Moppet, "it's a good thing I baked today. I can't imagine why they all came at once, but it's so nice to see them." And she welcomed them all with a smile. Everyone settled down comfortably. "Doesn't look much like a party to me," whispered Mrs. Robin to Mr. Robin, "but I smell good cookies." "Could we have been mistaken?" Mr. Rabbit said, and the 3 little rabbits sniffed the air. Oh, it smelled like fresh gingerbread. "It's quite evident that the Moppets are not having a party," said Mr. Bear, "yet I'm sure I do smell honey cake." Well, just then everyone was feeling disappointed, and Mrs. Moppet and the 7 little Moppets came in carrying trays of cookies and cakes and a large pitcher of lemonade. What a nice surprise! And you know, it was one of the very best parties of all, and everyone was happy. And that is the story of the surprise party. And now, boys and girls, I have time enough to say Goodbye for Telestory time for this Saturday morning.